Now, Ms. Fraser-Butlin, before we begin with the next witness, Mark, as I think he wishes to be known, let me first make an announcement generally. This is for everyone here and those who are in the press room. Yesterday we heard from Mr. I, as he was then known. I made an order restricting any disclosure of his identity. Part of that order provided that I could, during the course of the inquiry, revoke the order. I'm now going to do so. And I can tell you that his name is Conan McElrath. He has asked that his anonymity be released. He has given his solicitors instructions which they have conveyed to the inquiry. And because this inquiry does its best to respect the witnesses' wishes where appropriate, that's what I'm going to do. So the order, so far as he is concerned, is lifted, and he may now be referred to by his actual given name, Conan McElrath.
Thank you.
Let's have Mark, shall we?
Before he comes up, just for those who are watching on the live stream, the audio will be heard, and I'm afraid they'll have my face and your face, sir, but not that of Mark.
Well, I'm sorry about the quality of the visuals in that case, but yes, that again is respecting his wishes. So, Mark, please. It will follow, incidentally, before he is sworn, that if you are taking photographs around and about, please don't take a photograph of Mark.
Please state your full name.
Mark Donnelly.
And repeat after me. I do solemnly, sincerely.
I do solemnly, sincerely.
And truly declare and affirm.
And truly declare and affirm.
That the evidence I shall give.
That the evidence I shall give.
Shall be the truth.
Shall be the truth.
The whole truth.
The whole truth.
And nothing but the truth.
And nothing but the truth.
Mark, you're here to speak about your late father, Peter.
Yeah.
Your dad had severe haemophilia A and received regular factor products.
Yeah.
Now, you were born in 1980.
Yes.
And if we can have a look at document 2609002, and we highlight the main paragraph of the letter, we can see that your dad's last negative result for HIV was the 20th of May 1983. There were no samples available for 1984, and the first sample of 1985 taken on the 10th of January 1985 was positive.
Yes.
So the records indicate that he was infected. HIV was present in late 83 or during 84, and your dad died in 1989.
Yes, that's true.
Now, because you were young at the time, you don't really know any more details about when he was told that he was HIV positive or what he was told at that time.
No, I don't know anything. Just what I've been told in the last few months from my brothers, who also don't know a big pile because of the secrecy surrounding it.
But for you, your memory of your father was of him being very unwell.
Yeah.
Can you tell us what you remember about his physical ill health?
Well, he was always he always found it hard to walk. His knees and stuff like that was always at him, which from a young age I was told, it was just part and parcel of haemophilia. But like I'm talking about whenever I was 3-4 year old, that sort of first memories of him. That gradually sort of got worse in my eyes, but my latest memories and most of my memories of him is in the suppose in the few years before he died, and he would have been more or less in bed in the house for long periods of time. I'd have been there going out to primary school in the morning. My mother would have been working from early, and I'd have been in and brought him glasses of water and tablets and stuff like that, and then went on to school. Like, he'd have been up whenever Eddie came home. He very rarely would have went out of the house at that stage, and wouldn't have done too much. Like.
And in terms of his mental health, he found the situation very difficult.
Yeah, well, just as I say, it's very hard for me to know. I just knew this was as normality, like. But from talking to my brothers, like, on things that was in the house, you know, he did have a life before what I knew. Like, there was, he threw darts. He had tons of darts trophies in the house. From time to time, these trophies were brought down to encourage me to eat my dinner. I was given a trophy if I had all my dinner. And, you know, there was pictures in our house of my dad presenting me with a trophy at our front door when I was about 4 or 5 year old. Like. I say at a time, he was an outgoing man. He'd been in and around the community like anybody else. I can't remember it.
But your memory of your father is of someone who was really a recluse.
Yeah. Even, like, I remember going to play football like any young fella, and my father taking me down, and like, the local club, he was a member of it. He was a committee member of it at one point, and he took me down and he sat in the car and he shouted out of the window at the guy training us. He says, there's another one for you. And I got out and I went about my going to learn how to play football, and that was the last time he'd took me. Like. And for me, like, I have a young son now, he's 9, and that's normality for a father. Like.
Shortly after your dad was diagnosed with HIV, the whole family moved house. You moved from a housing estate in Armagh to a row of cottages in the countryside.
Yeah.
And that was particularly difficult for the family because you were moving as a Catholic family into a predominantly Protestant area.
Yeah.
Can you tell us, given that context, why you think your parents moved?
Well, it's only looking back on it now and learning other stuff over the last few months that it seems strange. We lived in a nationalist housing estate of over 300 houses where, you know, people were close together, everybody knew each other. So they did, and then we moved to a row of cottages. There were, I think it was 8 out of the 10 families that lived in them were Protestants, which was, at the time, it was extremely strange. All them people are lovely people. Like, I'm not saying anything against them, but looking back at what was happening here at the time, it was a strange move. So it was, although my father did come from in around that area, it's still a strange move to make, to bring your family into that.
And you've said that you were never told that it was because of the HIV that you made that move, but given the very strange nature of the move for you and your family, you think that one of the main reasons for it was the fear that the local community would find out about your father's illness.
Yeah, I think it's a very distinct possibility, as the distance between the two houses isn't really that far. You know, where we lived, you could walk it to the other house in 10 minutes. So you could. As I say, the distance isn't that far. My mother, at the time, you know, she stated that it was because of my father's ill health, and he needed a bungalow, which the new house was. It was a bungalow, and she had to fight to get it, so she did, and she got it. But looking at everything now, whenever we lived in the first house, which was a 2-story council house, my parents got a shower put into that house at one point. Again, the reasons for that, we were told at the time, was because of my father's ill health and his disability. I have theories on other reasons for it, but the house we moved to, which we lived in for 2 years prior to my father's death, had a bathtub in it, and there was no shower in it. You know, so there's stuff that just doesn't add up about the reasons why we moved. Like, and I think it was basically like there's less people in the countryside. There's less chance of somebody finding something out. There's less chance of people knowing your business. If your neighbours are predominantly Protestant at that time, there's even less chance of them knowing your business, because they mightn't actually want to speak to you, which happened with some of the neighbours, not them all.
And so you've said it was really to avoid the stigma and the news of your father's illness spreading anywhere. Or at least you think.
That's my personal opinion on it.
Your parents didn't tell the extended family about your dad's illness?
No, not as far as we know. As I say, my brothers, they still don't know, on to this day when they're home and they're talking to family members, they always wonder, you know, did they know, did they not know? I'd say as far as we know, it was very, very closely kept secret. Like.
And you recall a particular conversation happening between your mum and your aunt when your father died. What was that?
Yeah, it was the morning. It was the morning after my father died, and I was being looked after in my cousin's house, and I was called down, and I was told my mummy wanted to speak to me, down in my aunt's house, which was just down below it. And I went down into the kitchen, and that's when my mother told me that my father died that night. I came down to the house thinking that my father was back home from hospital. But during that conversation, my mother had that conversation with me, and as you can imagine, there was a lot of tears and a lot of sadness. And I was sitting on my mother's knee, and then my mother started. She was crying nearly hysterically, but she was saying to my aunt, what am I going to tell people? I can't even tell people. What am I going to tell people? And my aunt turned around and said, don't worry about it. Just tell them he had cancer. And I don't know why, for years that stuck with me. It always has stuck with me. And like it didn't help, because even though I didn't know anything at that time, I was 9 years of age, and I always had that memory, and I always knew there was something strange about my father's death. There was something that just didn't add up.
But at that point, even you didn't know that your father had died of AIDS?
No. I just thought, at that point, it was the progression of haemophilia. You know, I thought this was just an unfortunate thing due to that.
Your dad died in hospital.
Yeah.
What happened with the funeral arrangements?
The funeral, from what I remember, his body wasn't brought home that first night. I was told that morning that my father died, and that afternoon I was taken into town to get shoes and kitted out for the funeral. And it was the following day, whenever the family and the undertakers and all went down to the Royal Victoria Hospital to collect the body, and went into the room, and there was the coffin sitting there, and everything was closed up, and we took it down the road. It came down the road in the hearse, and it went straight to the chapel. And he spent the next night in the chapel. And it was strange at the time. Like even as a 9-year-old boy, I knew what a wake was. And my mother made the excuse. I genuinely think it was an excuse now. For years I didn't, but my mother made the excuse that she didn't want to remind my aunt of her husband's funeral, which was 2 years previous. At the time we were living with my aunt as our own house was getting renovated. But there was still people that came around to the house. There was people came around to the house to give their condolences and all. It was still effectively a wake house, but there was no body, there was no remains. My father told people that my mother told people that was my father's wishes to spend the night in the chapel before his funeral, which in some cases would be normal enough, but it would usually be done on the second day of the week. My father's first night of the week was in the Royal Victoria Hospital, and it's only recently, very recently, from coming to these inquiries that I've sort of been able to put two and two together regarding that, and I know now. I think I know now that obviously my mother knew that was going to be a closed coffin funeral, and this was her way of avoiding the questions at a wake, and her way of not having to try to tell people or justify why it was closed. As I say, back to secrecy again, back to the stigma of what my father died of.
We'll talk about your mum in a minute, but what's the impact of your dad's illness and death been on your relationship with your brothers?
Well, they both found out about his illness when they were in their I'd say their late teens. My oldest brother, Paul, he went to university probably shortly after that, and he was very rarely home. And in my eyes, looking at that now, that itself was abnormal. It's abnormal for that to happen. Whenever I look at other people and see other people going to university and they're coming home maybe every week. Like he only went to Belfast. It was only down the road, like an hour's drive. But he stayed away a lot, and I think that was his way of dealing with the fact that he was told and he was sworn to total secrecy by my mother about my father's illness. It seems very logical to me that it was easier for him to live in a big city where nobody knew him, nobody really knew him, and nobody knew any of his business than it was to be at home regularly. My other brother, Sean, he has told me recently, like he still can't talk about it. He finds it extremely hard to speak about it with anybody. My father died when he was 50, which is very young, and you do, from time to time, you get into these conversations with people, you know, that question obviously comes up, you know, how did your father die? And I don't think Sean answers it. He avoids the whole thing. I think Paul's the same. They avoid it. I've avoided it ever since I found out. You know, it's brutal, like, but all that stuff over the years, it's like everybody's just running away from the information. My relationship with Paul and Sean is extremely distant today. Our relationship with each other is extremely distant. They both live in America, so they do. Paul lived here for years. He had a family here, but we never really made it an importance to go and see each other or talk to each other or anything like that. It's nearly as if you know, there's something there all the time that you don't want to speak about, so you just avoid having to speak to people that possibly know and maybe will want to speak about. At the minute, my two brothers live approximately 2 hours drive apart from each other in America. On numerous occasions, both of them, when they have been at home here, they have both said that they see more of me living in Ireland than what they see of each other in America. Like, that's just, it's a totally, when I look at it, it's a totally abnormal relationship for three brothers to have.
And you've said that's largely because there's the elephant in the room that none of you feel able to talk about.
Yeah. I think the three of us have spoke more about this over the last few months than we ever have. It's strange. It's very strange.
Your father's death had a huge impact on your mother. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah. She blamed herself, so she did, and her mental state was extremely bad, and she took to drinking, she took to alcohol, and she drank a lot. My teenage years revolved around trying to stay away from the house. I would have tried to stay in my friends' houses for as long as possible. I didn't want to go home. And total fear of what I might find whenever I went through the door. It was better just not to go home, or go home at a suitable hour whenever I knew my mother would have effectively drank herself till sleep and be comatose, and I'd go home then.
If you did go home early, you've described in your statement that you came home from school to find her drunk, which led you to shout at her.
Yeah.
This was a position someone of my age should never have been put in.
Yeah. There was there was tons of arguments between me and my mother, and it was always due to drink. Like, I shouldn't have had to deal with any of that. The sheer volume of stuff that she was drinking, it was insane. Like, I'm 39 now and have the odd drink and I go out and enjoy myself, but the volume of alcohol my mother was putting into herself, it was insane. So it was.
And in one of those arguments, that's when you were told that your father had died of AIDS.
Yeah, I think I was possibly 14 or 15, and my mum was sitting in the sitting room in a chair with a glass of vodka, and I was giving off to her about this, about her being an alcoholic, and I was hunting through the house to try to find the alcohol that she hid all over the place. It was impossible to find it, and whenever you did find it, the next thing something else would turn up the next day, and you couldn't, you couldn't even figure out where it came from. But she was sitting there and I was shouting, giving off and stuff like that, and she kept shouting, saying to me that I didn't understand, and it wasn't. She kept saying that basically she was repeating herself, saying that I didn't understand, and I said to her, I says, well, make me understand, why is it you're doing this? I says, what? I thought it was my fault, and then she just came out with it, and she told me that she killed my father. She told me that she murdered my father. And she told me that I couldn't believe what she was saying. I says, how did you do that? And then she turned around and she says, I done it. I pumped poison into his veins. And I still couldn't understand it. And then the whole thing calmed down a bit, and then she explained that he had got HIV through, in her eyes, through a factory injection that she had administered to him.
And the relationship between you and your mum had largely broken down by the time that she died in 2000, and also her relationship with your brothers.
Yeah, I was still living in the house, so I was, although I was living in the house, although I had made my own bedroom in the garage of the house, which was detached. There was no real need to do that other than just trying to get out of the house. So our house was a 3-bedroom house. The only person living at the time was my mother. Our relationship had massively broke down. Now, like, she did have good days where she wouldn't have been drinking. She maybe went off the drink for a week, sometimes maybe possibly 2 weeks, but it would always come back. It would always crop back up. So it would, and say my relationship with my mother was shaky, to say the least.
You described her being prone to nasty and hurtful outbursts fueled by her addiction.
Yeah, she she would call you names. She would give off about whatever you were doing at the time. It was. She got very, very nasty whenever she was drunk. It got that bad at one stage. My brother Paul, he was living in Belfast at the time with his wife and his 3 children, and he stopped coming anywhere near Armagh, to see her. He stopped answering phone calls to her at one point, and he barred her from seeing her grandchildren. This was my mother to me when she was telling me this. She'd have used this. Like, alcoholics tend to use things to try to make you to feel sorry for them. And when I would have been arguing with her, she would have used this as well, that it was all Paul's fault. Now, it was Paul's fault because he done this and he done that and he done the other. It wasn't. She got to a stage where she blamed Paul's wife for it. It wasn't Paul, because, it was Paul's wife. It wasn't, like, all of that happened because of her alcoholism. So it was her, and that relationship. The relationship between Paul and my mother was under extreme stress. It was very, very broken.
You've now got your own family.
Yeah.
And that's made you reflect on your relationship with your dad.
Yeah.
You feel that many things have been robbed from you, and you've given some particular examples.
Yeah. Well, my own son. He's 9 years of age now. He's the same age I was when my father died. I take him to his football. I take him to whatever he needs to do. In the future, I'm hoping I'll be there for when he gets married. My father wasn't there when I got married. My mother wasn't there when I got married. My father wasn't able to get to either of my brother's weddings, so he wasn't there for either of that. Just the normal things, like the normal things that anybody would expect to have in a father-son relationship. That's the stuff that I'm at now, and all the time when something else comes up that fake does. I was sitting thinking that this is stuff that I've missed out on. I haven't had this, so didn't happen to me. Like.
You also feel that your father's death's impacted on your work and your career. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, well, just looking at if you generalise it, like both my brothers went on to third level education and went down that route. I didn't, although I went to good enough school. I passed some GCSEs, went back to do my A-levels, but it just wasn't for me. I was always rebellious. I was always fighting against authority. I never listened to anybody's advice. I made it up as I went along, and to me that's something to do. That's something to do with not having that father figure there. After my father died, my mother tried to. She sort of tried to get my oldest brother Paul to in some way possibly adopt that role, but in my eyes that was never happening. Like he tried his best, so he did, but that wasn't happening. As I say, the only thing different between our childhood and our teenage years, or where you mould yourself into the person you're going to be, is they had my father there. I didn't.
And through all of this, have you or any of the family had any counselling or psychological support?
Not as far as I know, or my two brothers. They also said that they can never remember anything like that. And to me that's just wrong. They were in their late teens, early 20s. Like whenever you're going through that, that's a time whenever you need that sort of help, and it wasn't there. They were left on their own, sworn to secrecy, unable to even tell their best friends what really was going on.
There's one more matter I'd like to ask you about, and that is what happened on your 18th birthday. A cheque arrived in the post,
Yeah.
and there's some contention between you and your brothers about what that cheque was for. But can you
Yeah.
tell us about what the thoughts from the family are?
Well, I got a cheque sort of for a substantial amount of money to me. My mother already told me that this was coming to me when I was 18. She had told me that it was from my father. So she did, and it was his money. And she went on to tell me that it came from a sale of a house in England in the 70s. My oldest brother, his recollection of it is that money was some form of a payout from the government to my father. I don't know what's true. Like, he was told one thing by my mother, I was told another thing by my mother. I think over the years she was, to say the least, very convenient with the truth of what happened. It has caused arguments between us about where it came from or what it was. You know, as I say, I don't know. I don't know whether it was a payment or not. I don't know.
But your brother recalls a conversation, certainly with your mother, possibly with your father, that was the money was something from a what we now know as a trust from the government in relation to the HIV.
Yeah, he recalled that conversation. So he did. As I say, I don't know. I know what my mother told me. So I do.
You wanted to put some of the pieces of the jigsaw together about your father, so you sought his medical records.
Yeah.
Did you manage to obtain very many? We saw one of a handful.
No, not really. There's very, very little came. It was whenever I started down along this road, after seeing the opening of the inquiry on the news. My first port of call obviously was the GP surgery, which we were all. It was the family GP. We were all in it. So I went there and asked them. I gave them my father's name and his date of birth and everything, and they couldn't find him on the system. They started saying, "Are you sure he was in this GP?" And I says, "Well, this was the family GP," and they told me that he quite possibly might be in a different GP. That sometimes married couples would have different GPs. I said, right, fair enough, and they looked up, and then there was another secretary there. There was first secretary was looking the stuff, and there was another woman there, and she was an older woman, so she was, and she'd been working in this GP surgery for a long time, and she turned around and she asked me, was I Madeleine's son? And I said, yeah, which was my mother's name. I said, yeah. She turned around and says, no. She says, your father's records should be there. She says, I remember them coming in. He says, I remember your father coming in, I remember your mother coming in. And she went and she was looking up the computer again. So she was, and she really couldn't understand why they weren't there. And I said to her, I says, maybe it's just because he died in 1989. And she said, no. She says, if he was a patient here in this surgery, says his records would be here. they should be here. And she really couldn't understand it. And she gave me the address of a place in Belfast to go and check there. So I went down. At this stage, I still didn't really know whether that was his surgery or not. I had no evidence of it. I had nothing in the house. So we went down to this other place in Belfast, myself and my wife, and we went into it. I forget the name of the place. We went into it, and I told them I told them at the desk what I was looking, and this guy went away, and then he came down the stairs, and he said to me, he says, does the name Drumcoot mean anything to you? And I says, yeah. I says, that's the address where we lived when my father died. That was the address of my aunt's house. And he says, right. He says, well, I have his medical number. And that was all I was looking at the time, was his medical number, because I needed his medical number to fill in some of the forms, I think, for the solicitors and stuff. And he says, there's his medical number. And he handed me this sheet. He says, that's all we have. We don't have anything else. And it was a piece of paper. I think I still have it. It was a piece of paper with my father's name and his medical number printed at the top. And there was nothing else on it. And then in handwritten letters, there was the name Drumcoot written down. And I came out, and I was happy to have the medical number at that time. But I remember thinking when I came out, I said to my wife, I said, he said there's nothing else there. It's how can there be nothing else there if he has obviously seen the name Drumcoot on something, and he has written it on this page. So there must be something else there, because Drumcoot wasn't on that page, in typed like everything else. And I couldn't understand it. And then we then went to the Royal, and the Royal sent us down to wherever the place where all that stuff's stored or whatever it is. I went in there, and a guy came down, so he did, and he was talking to us, and I gave him the name and date of birth, and I had the medical number at this stage. I gave him that as well, and he went away up the stairs, and he came back down, and he started telling me that it was illegal for me to obtain my father's medical records, and it was against the law for deceased relatives to get these, and the reason is because it can create arguments and tension between deceased relatives. And this was his words, and at the time I took it as true, and since then I've asked the solicitors from Watkins and Gunn, and they've informed me that that's not particularly true. Eventually, we sent letters off to a variety of hospitals, and eventually we got a small number of pages back that dated from sometime in I think it was maybe the first date on it is possibly the late 70s or something.
You've been given about 19 pages of A4, and that's all you've got.
Yeah, that was it. So it was.
And none of those documents that you have are any clinical records. What they are they're letters dealing with litigation matters for a small accident that your father had.
Yeah. It was a car accident, I think, in the late 70s. My two brothers can remember it. Where my mother and father they were in a car, and I think they ended up. It was a dark night or something like that, and they ended up driving into a herd of cattle. So. And
as part of that litigation process, there had been a request from the solicitor about when your father was infected with HIV, and hence the letter we looked at earlier.
Yeah.
But there's no what we would normally call clinical records dealing with appointments or attendances anywhere.
No, nothing. One thing that I don't say, you can only sort of, from my point of view, you can only sort of guess at these things. But one thing that was on one of the pages was a handwritten note on the bottom of it, written by by my father's doctor in the Royal, that said that it was important to ring the GP's office and stress the importance of confidentiality regarding my father's illness, obviously. I don't know, does confidentiality mean hitting the delete button? Like, because my father didn't exist in that GP surgery. Probably still doesn't to this day. I never went back near them.
Those are the questions I have for you. Is there anything else you would like to add?
Yeah, I wrote this out last night. I'd just like to read it if that's okay. Sorry. Eight months ago, I found out about the infected blood inquiry. Since then, I found myself on a very steep learning curve, realising more than I could have imagined. The reasons for my father's death at the age of 50, the reasons behind my mother's chronic alcoholism and depression, which led to her death at the age of 58, and the abnormal, distant relationship between myself and my brothers. I'd like to thank everyone who took this seat and shared their stories. Stories which have many similarities with my own. But for this inquiry, I would never have known them. From what I have learned over the last few months, I have a few points I'd like to take this opportunity to highlight. I have an issue with the sheer lack of transparency from the NHS towards patients in their care. My mother blamed herself for infecting my father with HIV from Factor 8 that she believed she had administered. This guilt drove her to a life of alcohol dependency and ultimately death. And knowing what I know now, I can't help but wonder if the truth was told from the beginning, would my mother have felt as guilty, and would she possibly be still alive today? The secrecy that was forced upon my family, secrecy that has lasted to this very day, by the absolute terror and fear of being stigmatised, in my opinion, could most certainly have been avoided. The deliberate scaremongering in the 1980s by government-sponsored advertising campaigns created an environment of fear and further legitimised the stigma that surrounded HIV and Hep C sufferers. The government and these ad campaigns conveniently avoided telling the truth of what was going on in NHS hospitals with NHS supplies of contaminated blood products. My father, like thousands of others, placed his trust in the NHS doctors to make the best decision for his health and well-being. The knowledge of the dangers of blood pooling was in medical circles and the NHS well known from the 1960s. Being an immensely cheaper way of making blood products such as Factor 8, surely at the very least, the pharmaceutical companies who manufactured these blood products should have been obliged to guarantee that only the best blood would be used in this mass manufacturing of product, knowing that one infected donor would infect an entire batch of pooled blood. These same pharmaceutical companies collected blood from the cheapest possible sources, such as prisons, greatly increasing the chance of having an infected donor. In my opinion, given all this, someone was certainly to blame for my father's death. Should it be a pharmaceutical CEO who made a decision to buy cheap blood from prisons? Or perhaps a government minister who looked the other way whilst infected blood products were dished out on their watch? Or even maybe a doctor who prescribed blood products knowing the increased dangers and chance of infection? These are all very distinct possibilities. But I know one thing for certain. Although my mother blamed herself for my father's death, she was certainly not to blame. Another innocent life taken by guilt, a guilt that belongs to someone else. This family secret that has a huge ongoing effects on my brothers and I should never have been our secret to keep. This secret belongs solely to the NHS, the government and the pharmaceutical companies. And thanks to Sir Brian and the inquiry team, neither I nor my family have to keep this secret anymore. My father's name was Peter Donnelly. He was murdered in 1989 by lethal injection of contaminated blood products supplied and prescribed by the NHS, imported by the government from the US pharmaceutical companies. Thank you.
Mark, if you just wait there one moment, I'm sorry, I'm just going to ask Mr. Lloyd. No, there's nothing.
And just remains for me to thank you. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
We'll take a break until 2:10.
Thank you, sir.